and for my talk today is Echoes into the Past, Outbreaks of Future Technologies and the Present. And I picked that title specifically because we're here to talk about existential risks and existential threats. And this is all well and good, but we also have to keep in mind what we have now that we can be advancing and making use of to make the prospect of an existential risk actually coming to pass, a little less catastrophic. My attorneys asked me to make the following disclaimers. One, I do not speak for my employers, past or present. And two, some of the things we're going to talk about, I work on in some capacity. Some of them I don't, but I think they're really good ideas that could use more attention. So who am I? Well, my name is Bryce A. Lynch. That's my email address, my PGP key, my website, my Twitter handle. I do a bunch of stuff, but this isn't about me. So there are things that we in the transhumanist community love talking about, and we'll talk about them for hours on end if you let us. Things like cryonic suspension, radical life extension, intelligence enhancement, the creation of artificial general intelligence, and genetic manipulation. Well, these are all things I think we should be working to bring into everyday life, because the potential benefits of any of these technologies could improve the human condition immensely, assuming that it gets into the hands of enough people. Because access to technology is often predicated upon money and getting people to actually let you play around with these things. Now, these lofty goals will probably not come to pass explosively. They're being built step by step and advance by advance. Now, some of these advances fly under our collective radar because they come from directions or communities that don't seem to get a whole lot of press. For example, we're not going to start seeing anything about grinders on CNN for at least the next couple of years. Maybe some of these projects aren't advanced as they could be for this very reason, because people tend to work on things that they know about that they find interesting. If you don't know about it, it's sort of a problem. And perhaps other projects aren't being used optimally relative to their problem spaces. As Alton Brown so famously said, the only thing in the kitchen that should have one purpose is the fire extinguisher. I respectfully disagree. So the first thing I'd like to talk about are adhocracies. They were first described by Alvin Toffler in the book Future Shock in 1970. Recently, Rick Falkvinge wrote about them in the book Swarmwise, published in 2013 from a practical perspective, because an adhocracy is ultimately how he created the pirate party in Europe, and it's how we're trying to start the pirate parties in the United States. An adhocracy is best implemented as a brain trust of people, of highly motivated people who have diverse backgrounds and skill sets. The reason for that is by having a group of people with diverse backgrounds, they bring multiple perspectives and to the table, which can lead to the creation of sometimes elegant solutions to very difficult problems. The idea is that in an event, a subset of that brain trust comes together to solve specific problems. They enact the solutions and then they disperse back into the brain trust to recuperate and find something else to do, because you can't do that sort of thing all the time. The individuals in question gather and process information, draw conclusions, and then implement the solutions to the problem at hand. They're characterized by a highly fluid structure with minimal to no internal control mechanism. So there was no one sitting at the top telling people what to do and partitioning people. They communicate the problem, they communicate the options, they communicate suggestions, and they communicate resources that they may wish to explore, and let the group that comes out of the group figure out what to do with it. So what do adhocracies need to function? First of all, they need an unobstructed communications platform so that the people who come together can collaborate. They also need a stable information sharing platform to store and analyze information. And that can be something as simple as Etherpad or a wiki. It could be a more complex solution like a distributed revision control system like Git or Fossil, or a message board. We've all seen what 4chan can do. Or even file sharing software like RetroShare, which encompasses all those things and more with its plugin architecture. And of course, adhocracy needs a motivated group of individuals who are committed to carrying out tasks and achieving goals before everything else, like crawling around online reading I can hash cheeseburger. Admit it, we've all done it, we should have been working. That's the one thing you have to avoid if you want to get things done. Now, are there really any functioning adhocracies? Well, we've all seen what Anonymous is capable of. And they're kind of scary once you get them going in a direction. There's another adhocracy called Telecomics, which is comprised of hacktivists around the globe who were most active during the Arab Spring and Occupy. And their communications network was an IRC network with Etherpad wikis, as well as squatting on whatever information domains that they could get. And they functioned to not only train dissidents and protesters on the ground, they also acted as a news bureau, funneling information into and out of heavily censored areas. And they even managed to enact changes to EU policy in certain respects. There's also an Idiocracy that is fairly recent. They're called the cypherpunks. And cypherpunks is a massively distributed music group. The idea is anybody can publish any kind of music they want under the name of cypherpunks, and it is considered a legitimate release for the band. In fact, they've already released a couple of albums covering as diverse styles as neoclassical, progressive rock, hip-hop, and 8-bit chiptunes. They also have their own cryptocurrency, which they intend to use as a form of stock in the band, as in holding stock and being able to use that to have a vote in a corporation, as well as a currency for tipping individual musicians, and eventually even selling merchandise, tickets, and releases online. I also can't really talk about Idiocracies without talking about flash mobs. I know they've sort of dropped off the cultural radar because they're very first decade, but they're functioning Idiocracies. The idea is word gets out, motivated people come together and do something. The one that comes immediately to mind was the flash mob supercomputer, which was created briefly at the University of San Francisco in the year 2004. Over 700 computers were brought together into a gymnasium. They were networked. They all booted a custom live distro Linux, and they formed a massively parallel supercomputer. In 2004, a massively parallel machine that hit 180 gigaflops was pretty impressive. These days, not so much. But when you take into account the advances in computing technology, software engineering, and software toolkits, if we did the same thing right now, who knows what we could accomplish? I'm kind of curious, actually. I'd also like to talk a little bit about open education. Access to good educational materials can be difficult because many schools cannot afford to update their curriculum. The cost of textbooks is very high, and we take into account the fact that there are people who spend lots and lots of time and money watering down science and engineering textbooks. It's not really a surprise that the general quality of STEM education in this country is substandard. The World Economic Forum ranks the United States 49th in the world in math and science education. The United States is also ranked 27th and following in proportions of college students who receive degrees in science or engineering. Not everybody has to become a scientist or an engineer, but it's worth keeping this in mind. In addition, the National Math and Science Initiative has observed that 54% of high school graduates are ill-prepared for college-level math, and 67% of high school grads are not prepared for basic college science, which is not too different from senior year science in high school, if you think about it. Additionally, teachers are overworked, badly underpaid, they get no respect and very little support. It's really a shame. So what can we do to fix this? Well, we have to get our heads straight. We're all intelligent people in this room. We all have our eyes on our goals. That doesn't mean that we can't help somehow. All of us can teach something if we really give it a shot. Libraries are always looking for people to help, and hackerspaces regularly hold classes and are always looking for instructors. Additionally, there are community education programs seeking both students and teachers. The two that come immediately to mind are the Knowledge Commons in DC and the public school in the Bay Area. In fact, there's a classroom in Oakland, California, just a couple miles down the road. They also need educational materials. The thing that comes immediately to mind is the Khan Academy, which was founded by Salman Khan in 2006 as an outgrowth of when he was tutoring his younger cousin in mathematics over Yahoo Doodle. Then he started recording his lectures and putting them on YouTube. Then he put his course notes and his problem sets online. 8 short years later, the Khan Academy has 4,000 lectures, 100,000 homework problems, and other courseware in such diverse courses as early mathematics through trigonometry, calculus, differential equations, linear algebra, sciences from basic biology to organic chemistry, and even MCAT prep, economics and finance, and test prep for the SAT, the GMAT, and collegiate brush-ups. Also, the Khan Academy materials are published in 30 languages for free. They're under a Creative Commons by attribution, non-commercial share-alike license. Additionally, there is some open source software called KA-Lite, which is software which allows you to download parts of the Khan Academy archive, organize them into classes and curricula, and go through the lessons and do the homework at your own pace. The KA-Lite will also act as a tool if you're holding class using these materials. It's also open source, it's written in Python, and it is written in such a way that it can run on some very lightweight hardware. For example, you can easily go through the entire Khan Academy curriculum on a $30 Raspberry Pi, using a television, keyboard, you scavenge out of a dumpster. And there are other free and libre education materials out there. We're all familiar with MIT's open courseware, which you can find pretty much anywhere. I'd also like to mention CD3WP, which is called Dystopia in a Box. And it consists of 555 gigabytes and growing every day of information on practically everything. The idea is you should be able to a post-industrial society with the information in that collection. And it contains educational information as well as professional information on such diverse topics as engineering, food processing, sanitation, medicine. It also includes mirrors of Wikipedia, Project Gutenberg, and the Khan Academy. I'd also like to talk a little bit about OSINT analysis software. OSINT stands for Open Source Intelligence Information. Open Source Intelligence, or information which has been gathered from publicly available sources. It is widely believed that the term was coined by a man named Robert David Steele in the late 1980s while he was working as an intelligence analyst for the Central Intelligence Agency. And OSINT can encompass everything from mass media to social media to conference proceedings and presentations, and even scholarly works. Depending on who you talk to in the intelligence community, OSINT is considered more accurate than information gathered from classified sources, because classified sources are treated by the intelligence community as the gold standard. It came from a source you can't talk about, it has a classification label, therefore it is gospel truth. Therefore you cannot debate it, you cannot discuss it, and you also cannot critique it. OSINT, on the other hand, doesn't have that stigma. It can be critiqued, it can be debated, it can be refuted, which is extremely rare in the intelligence community. Also, classified intelligence information tends to support a party line. That's why inside the Beltway, the fall of the Iron Curtain in the late 1980s came as such a surprise, because all the analysts were implicitly told not to look at any dissenting information. So the question is, how do we make sense of it? Because looking at mass media and social media, there's a lot of information out there, and it's really hard to keep track of everything. So one possible solution is software called Martis. It's an open source information management tool for archiving and analyzing OSINT designed for use by human rights defenders, though I do think it has potential applications in other problem spaces. It supports 11 languages. It is written in Java, so it's designed to be as cross-platform as possible. The Martis software engineers have taken the old adage, write once, crash everywhere, it's boring, and are specifically writing their code so it doesn't do that. It's used for collecting and analyzing reports, imagery, and evidence of human rights violations. It is analysts enter data into the application where data points are stored as separate XML documents. They are indexed, so you can search on them. They're then encrypted and stored to disk. Additionally, data is taggable and searchable, so you can sift through it with queries and find patterns in the data and try to make sense of it. Additionally, it has a geo API, so you can take those search queries and analyses that you do in the context of Martis and export it to a map so you can visualize it and make better sense of it. What the? Did I just? Great, thanks. Okay, I'd also like to talk a little bit about open source prosthetics. Now, I don't mean polished chrome cyberpunk replacement limbs, so that would be awesome, but actual usable replacement limbs that people are walking around with today. They were originally designed for children who were born with limb defects, but people who have lost limbs due to accidents, misfortune, and combat have started to catch wind of them and work on these projects. Part of this is because normal prosthetic limbs are incredibly expensive. They often cost between $5,000 and $50,000 a piece, and most insurance companies refuse to cover them, though a few of them can be bullied into partially covering them on a case-by-case basis. Also, because a lot of the components in commercially available prosthetic limbs are custom-made, it is very expensive to get them repaired if they do break. And they also don't grow as the wearer grows. So if a child has a prosthetic arm, in a couple short years, the parents have to drop another $25,000 on an arm. As you may imagine, that's a bit prohibitive. So the Open Prosthetics Project was founded a couple years ago by former Marine Jonathan Kunaholm. He lost part of his right arm to an IED blast when he was on duty in Iraq. After receiving his first prosthetic hand at the VA, he promptly discovered that it sucked and decided to do something better. So he started designing his own prosthetic limbs. They are open source, they are licensed in the public domain, and they were specifically meant to be improved upon and fabricated for anybody who needs them. Everything can be built if you're running neighborhood hackerspace. All of the custom components are 3D printable. All of the other components are easily locally sourceable. You might have to go to a hardware store or Radio Shack, but the components are very easy to pull together. And because they're 3D printable and use commodity components, they're very easy to repair. You can easily buy a replacement Arduino at Radio Shack for $20 if you have to. And they have a wiki, it's called the Open Prosthetics Project Wiki, which has more information about what they've been doing and how they've been doing it. I also like to mention the Open Hand Project, which is a project which specifically aims to advance the state-of-the-art prosthetic hands. I don't mean Trotman hooks, but replacement hands which have as many degrees of freedom as organic hands. They were funded with the successful Indiegogo campaign in 2013 and are still hard at work. And all these projects have been putting the great prints for the custom components on Thingiverse. So if you do a Thingiverse search on prosthetic, you'll find several hundred sets of components that you can use to build prosthetic limbs. Mostly arms and hands right now, though legs are all, though people are starting to worm on legs. And another thing, the hackerspace HackDC, which is a hackerspace in downtown Washington, D.C., as the name implies, published earlier this year the great prints and source code for an open source biosignal amplifier, which can be configured as an EEG, an EKG, or an EMG. It's open source. The whole project carries the GPL-v3 license, and it has a modular architecture which is designed for safety as a primary goal. It has both analog and USB 2.0 outputs, so you can use it as an input to, in theory, any project you want. And it uses a combination of feedback AC coupling, active electrodes, a driven shield, a driven right leg circuit, and RF suppression to achieve noise levels of 1 microvolt across a bandwidth of 3 kilohertz. I'm told by some electrical engineers that this is several orders of magnitude below the noise floor of most commercially available medical diagnostic equipment. The bill of materials is approximately $190 for the whole shebang. Its low cost, its barrier to entry, and its relatively small size would make it ideal for experimenting with bioelectric control of open source prosthetic limbs, I think. Those two links go to the GitHub repositories for the source code for the software and firmware, as well as the great prints for the components. I also think I need to talk about censorship circumvention technologies, because many of these things require a functioning communications network to run, or at least to get to. And it is now blatantly obvious that everything that can possibly be used as a surveillance mechanism is being used by a surveillance mechanism by someone. If it's not the Five Eyes, it's the local governments. If it's not the local governments, it's providers themselves under the aegis of laws like SEPA. There are two things about network surveillance equipment that we have to keep in mind that are not obvious. First of all, they can be flipped from surveil to block trivially. This point was made a couple of years ago during the Arab Spring when a cadre of hacktivists infiltrated the network surveillance infrastructure of the government of Syria. And they discovered some very interesting things. First of all, they discovered that the database of signatures to look out for was being updated in near real time across the entire system. Second, they discovered that you can, if you have access to a console, and they got access to the management console, so they can do it, anyone else can theoretically do it, you can enter arbitrary signatures into the database of things you want to look for in the network traffic. Third of all, they discovered to turn that entire apparatus from a surveillance grid into a censorship grid that works very similar to China's Great Firewall was clicking a drop down in your web browser and clicking OK. So the point I'm trying to make is, if you're not one of the people who are running it, you have no say over what could get blocked and what could not get blocked. Today, information on birth control, sex education, information security, and activism are routinely blocked in schools, college campuses, even in libraries, and occasionally the free wireless networks of some airports, like Oakland International and SFO. Tomorrow, information on genetic manipulation, machine learning, open source software. Earlier this year, China briefly blocked GitHub. And grinding could be filtered by your provider. Maybe it's by accident, maybe it isn't. Maybe somebody will have hacked into the communication surveillance infrastructure of that provider and flipped that switch by clicking OK. Why do I think this? There are people who spend incredible amounts of time and money forcing textbook publishers to water down their science texts. For crying out loud, there are people who are protesting because Cosmos was back on the air. Fun fact, Carl Sagan received multiple death threats for his work on the original Cosmos. I'm morbidly curious about the kind of email that Neil deGrasse Tyson receives because of the new series. There are teachers who think that students who ask too many questions need to be medicated until they shut up. And unfortunately, I came from a school like that and came out of it with most of my skin intact. And it is trivial to send a DMCA takedown request and get something you don't like removed. Because the way the DMCA is written, the burden of proof is on the person who put something online and not the person who files the complaint. And most providers will automatically take down whatever it is because they really don't want the legal battle. And so, for example, somebody could send a fraudulent DMCA takedown request for any of the things I've already talked about and get arbitrary resources taken down. And it is the person who put them online in the first place who would have to spend time and way too much money getting them put back on. Google reported that the number of DMCA takedown requests they've received has increased over 711,000% in the past 4 years. It's only a matter of time before someone gets the bright idea to apply these tactics to stuff they don't like. And why am I talking about these things? Well, the reason I'm talking about them is because these are all things that exist or are happening right now, which means we can build, modify, and use these things right now, all of us in this room if we want to. This also means we can advance the state of the art in any or all of these things if we want to. We can also use them to further our respective goals and possibly use them as stepping stones toward that grand transhuman future we spend so much time talking about on mailing lists. Additionally, I think we can use a combination of one or more of these things, and there are other things out there, it's not just what's in this presentation, as part of an next threat mitigation or remediation program. Because if we're talking about existential risks and existential threats, we cannot afford to think by the book. We also cannot afford to think small. We would have to be ready to do whatever is possible to preserve what we have and, at the very least, minimize the impact of the occurrence of an existential threat. The future will not come to us easily. It's built day by day, and technological advance by technological advance. Well, these advances have to leave the lab and get on the streets if they're going to mean anything, if they're going to do anything. These are technologies we can use to make the world a better place right now. Globally speaking, we transhumanists are the minority, which also means that we're in a unique position to bring about great change if we move in just the right way at just the right time. The future is up to us, and if we don't step out of the lab and get our boots on the ground where it really matters, we might not get this future we dream of. We might get someone else's, and it's anyone's guess as to how much say will have in it. Thank you. Question?
What specifically do you suggest we do?
What problem space do you work in?
AI.
Okay. Strong AI or weak AI? Okay. May I make an observation about people afraid of strong AI deciding that we humans are a pain and taking us out? Chances are, if and when strong AI is created, it's going to want to talk to people. And given some of the earlier talks about how people are afraid of things that are almost but not quite like us, the last thing we want to do is treat it in a xenophobic fashion. I mean, look at how women are treated online whenever they speak up. Do you really want to see this happen to an artificial intelligence that may be in a position to do something about it? The human race can't afford to act in a xenophobic fashion toward anyone. At the very least, we have to be willing to meet in the middle with them, and crying out loud, if we can just not insult them, what happened to common decency and common sense? Did we not grow up with... Next question? Next question?
Speaking about open education, why don't you speak about open science?
Because I don't know enough about it, not being a scientist, so my concern is I would give incorrect or misleading information.